I don't believe horses can read people's souls. Some do, or at least they like to say that horses can sense things we can't, that they know when someone is good or bad. I've worked with them long enough to know that's not quite true. They're sensitive, yes, more than most animals, but they're reacting to things we don't always notice. Body language, tension, smell, sound. Not secrets, not morality. Still, there are moments that make you pause. The first time I noticed it was on a Tuesday afternoon. Lessons had just started, a couple of regulars in the arena, and Mark was out the back checking feed. I was in the barn, tacking up one of the school horses when she walked in. Sandra, mid-40s, always polite, always on time. One of those riders who had waited most of her life to finally start lessons and was determined to do it properly. There was nothing wrong with her, on paper. But the moment she stepped into the barn, every horse lifted its head, not in curiosity, in tension, nostrils flared, ears flicking. One of the younger mares shifted in her stall, stamping once, then again. I paused, brush in hand, watching it ripple down the row. It wasn't panic, just discomfort. I stepped out and looked down the aisle. Sandra smiled when she saw me. "Hi, Helen." "Hi," I said, automatically smiling back. Behind me, one of the geldings snorted sharply. She didn't notice. Most people don't. I mentioned it to Mark that evening. "Have you noticed the horses reacting to Sandra?" I asked while we were closing up. He shrugged at first. "In what way?" "They don't settle when she's in the barn," I said. "It's subtle, but it's there. Ears, breathing, shifting." Mark leaned against the door frame, thinking. "I've seen a bit of it," he admitted. "Figured it was just one or two being fresh." "It's all of them," I said, "even the quiet ones." That made him pause. We left it at that, because sometimes there isn't an answer straight away. The next few lessons, I paid closer attention. It was consistent. Didn't matter which horses were in, which ones were being worked, or what time of day it was. Sandra walked in, and the entire barn changed just slightly, except for one. Benny. Benny was in the arena most afternoons. Big, solid, unbothered by almost everything. Sweet as anything, not particularly clever, and about as sensitive as a fence post. You could put a complete beginner on him, and he'd plod along like nothing in the world had ever gone wrong, which made him perfect for certain riders, and apparently completely immune to whatever the others were reacting to. One afternoon, I was standing by the arena with Simon, watching a lesson. Benny was out there, carrying a rider named Alicia. Alicia had opinions about everything. She wasn't a great rider, lazy at times, but then would randomly pull at the reins and needed to be constantly reminded to be gentle and consistent. She had a way of talking that made you feel like you were always just slightly doing something wrong. She must have overheard me mention Sandra's name to Simon because she steered Benny over toward us, pulling him up right near the fence. "What's this about Sandra?" she asked. I hesitated. "Nothing important," I said. "Just something I've noticed with the horses." Alicia snorted lightly. "Oh, I know the type." Simon raised an eyebrow. "The type?" "You know," she said, leaning slightly forward in the saddle. "People who make animals uncomfortable. There's always something off about them." I didn't respond. She kept going. "Probably nervous energy," she added. "Or one of those people who doesn't really understand animals but thinks they do. Horses pick up on that." Simon glanced at Benny, who was half asleep under her. "Interesting theory," he said mildly. Alicia smiled, clearly pleased with herself. "I've seen it before," she continued. "They just give off a bad vibe." That was when Sandra walked into the barn. Even from the arena, I saw the shift. Heads lifting, movement along the stalls, the same reaction as always. Alicia noticed too. "See?" she said, gesturing slightly. "There it is." Alicia turned Benny to face Sandra more directly. "Let's see how this one reacts," she said as she yanked the reins to the side. It happened quickly. Benny, who had ignored everything up until that point, suddenly threw his head up. Hard. Then, for the first time I had ever seen, he reared. Not high, not dramatic, but enough. Alicia wasn't expecting it. She lost her balance instantly and slid sideways, hitting the ground with a thud that knocked the breath out of her. For a second, everything went still. Then Sandra was the first one moving. She hurried into the arena, concern written all over her face. "Are you okay?" she asked, kneeling beside Alicia. Alicia, stunned and embarrassed, pushed herself up, clearly more shaken than she wanted to admit. "I'm fine," she snapped. Benny stood quietly a few steps away, already back to his usual unbothered self, like nothing had happened. Simon walked in after Sandra, taking in the scene. Then he paused, looked at Sandra, then at me, and said, very plainly, "It's the perfume." We all looked at him. "The horses don't like it," he continued. "To be honest, I don't like it either. It's the first thing I noticed when she walked into the barn, even before I saw her." There was a moment of silence, and then slowly it clicked. Mark, who had come over by then, nodded slightly. "Yeah," he said, "that would explain it." I thought back over the last few weeks. The timing, the consistency, the fact that it wasn't fear, just discomfort. "Strong scent," I said quietly. "Very strong," Simon replied. Sandra looked mortified. "Oh, I didn't even think," she started. "It's all right," I said quickly. "It's not your fault. We just didn't realize what it was." Alicia, still brushing dirt off herself, muttered something under her breath, but she didn't say anything else. The next week, Sandra came in a little early. No perfume. She mentioned she'd showered before coming instead of straight after work. "I thought I'd try it," she said, a little nervous. The difference was immediate. She stepped into the barn, and nothing happened. No flared nostrils, no shifting, no tension running down the line of stalls, just quiet. Normal. I watched as one of the more sensitive mares lowered her head again and went back to eating. Sandra noticed it too. "They're calm," she said. I smiled. "They like you," I said, and they did. Within a couple of sessions, she was riding one of the more sensitive horses, one we wouldn't have considered pairing her with before. Calm hands, steady energy. The horse relaxed under her in a way that told us everything we needed to know. Alicia was still riding Benny, still steady, still uneventful, though she was noticeably quieter these days and better at listening to instructions. People like to think animals are judging something deeper, something hidden. But most of the time, it's simpler than that. They're reacting to what's right in front of them. Things we miss, things we overlook, things we assume don't matter. Until they do. And once you figure it out, everything makes sense again.